A few weeks ago, I published a very long video about an influencer whose tutorials and reviews slowly turned into vlogs about crunchy conservatism and non-denominational Christianity. Her name is RawBeautyKristi, and she has the whole CrunchyCon package. A homestead, she's homeschooling her son, and her friends and family love Donald Trump, and they want to keep queer people out of schools. I made some big mistakes in that video, and I'm going to address them here, but I've written this companion video as a standalone essay. So if you haven't seen the original video, you'll still be able to follow along completely. This is a video about what to do when we get stuff wrong and the difference between holding each other to a high standard and an impossible one. This essay is in 2 parts, and it's framed by Kristi's story. In the first half, I'll be using Eduardo Bonilla Silva's theory of colorblind racism to illustrate and guide my own reflexive process. I'm going to model accountability and humility in response to the feedback I received. This includes learning new information and retelling the story, and revising my original analysis and commentary. And in the second half of the essay, I'll be tackling the subject of leftist brigading online, where it's coming from, and how we can use commentary and discourse in a productive way. So if you like storytelling that takes you through an exploration of politics and philosophy, this video is for you. And if you like video essays that provoke thought and contemplation, this video is also for you. And if you want to hear me address all of the drama channel controversy, this is for you as well. Let's go. Okay, let's begin our story. Our story starts in 2011, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of America. In the state of Washington, full of tall green trees and wildlife, a 23-year-old woman with polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome created a YouTube channel to share her deep longing to have children, whilst she struggled with infertility. She grew up in a small town. Her family was Christian, and she had suffered the loss of her mother at 16 years old. Her name is Kristi. Kristi believed in God, and she loved the kids she met at church, but by the time she was 19, she felt like a bit of an outsider. She waged a war against her body to try to fit in with what her community and her husband wanted. From 2011 to 2013, Kristi tried countless diets and medical interventions to make herself skinny and to make herself fertile. This was going to be her whole life. She didn't want to go to university, she just wanted to have kids. But after juice cleanses, fasting, raw veganism, she didn't get kids. She got chronic pain instead. So Kristi took her chronic pain and she grieved the loss of her dream of motherhood, and she started a beauty channel. She wasn't an expert at makeup, but she didn't need to be. She was creative and she was talented, and her husband was earning enough money that she could follow her dreams. She worked with wildlife because she loved animals, and she made YouTube videos. Kristi was funny, irreverent, and honest, and within 5 years she had hundreds of thousands of followers, and she was making good money. Sometimes she even traveled for work, attending conventions or influencer events, some in LA and some overseas. But she was never going to move out of Washington, and she knew it. She liked her small town, she liked the small life, she liked the community vibe. But what exactly was the small town vibe? The way Kristi described it was idyllic, in no small part because she said the community there was friendly. According to Kristi, they were good people. But who exactly was Kristi in community with?
Although the so-called Christian patriot movement as a whole is not characterized by a commitment to terrorist violence, the potential for violence by elements within the movement is always present.
In 1844, Washington, Idaho, and some parts of Montana were part of Oregon, and Oregon began passing laws known as the Oregon Black Exclusion Laws. They swiftly and effectively punished any black person who set foot in the state, so that by 1850, 6 years later, a census in Oregon showed that there were fewer than 50 black residents in the entirety of the state. The last of these laws was repealed in 1926. Many of the settlers in Oregon and later Washington held both anti-slavery and anti-black sentiments. This only sounds like a contradiction on the surface because functionally it just meant that they were fiercely exclusionary towards all black Americans, whether or not they were free. In fact, the whole of the Pacific Northwest is overwhelmingly white today, and that's no accident. Washington continued continues to be a hub for white supremacist activity to this day. There's a real theme in Washington's history of pretending to be nonviolent whilst being actively violent. In the 1920s, one of the strongest KKK clans in the country organized and carried out well-documented violence and intimidation against a variety of communities, but publicly the Washington KKK disavowed violence.
The fact that Oregon's population has remained overwhelmingly white is no accident. Rather, the present character of the state reflects a past in which African Americans and other racial minorities were deliberately excluded and publicly hated as a matter of state policy and cultural ethos. Although Oregon has developed a modern identity as a progressive ecotopia, under the surface lies a state that, in many ways, is still at odds with the values of diversity and multiculturalism.
None of that sounds idyllic, I have to say. I shouldn't have taken Kristi at her word when she talked about the community that she grew up in, because there's a constant underlying threat of violence in Washington. But it appears that it's a threat of violence that might only be noticeable to people who aren't white. And that's because the prevalence of white-only communities, even outside of white supremacist hubs like Washington, serves a really strong role in upholding this status quo. Eduardo Bonilla-Silva observes this tendency in a concept he calls white habitus.
One of the central consequences of the white habitus is that it promotes a sense of group belonging, a white culture of solidarity, and negative views about non-whites. By high school, they have already developed emotional attachments to whites as their primary racial group, learned a number of stereotypes about minorities, and bypassed the development of skills necessary to navigate multicultural experiences.
Bonilla-Silva explains that contemporary racism isn't about racism, it's about comfort. White habitus is a structure of socialization. It's not seen as intentional, even though there's clear data to show that white people do segregate themselves. It's a practice that goes unexamined in most people's lives. People living in white communities with white networks experience whiteness as the norm, but they don't do it with hate in their hearts. Mostly they don't even notice. One of the most powerful social skills that we learn as children is empathy. Yes, if you weren't aware, people are not born with empathy, we learn it from one another. And Bonilla-Silva explains that one of the strongest impacts of white habitus is that white people develop the skill of empathy around white people. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily uncaring or hateful towards non-white people, but they have no practice understanding them or considering their perspectives. White habitus is one of many social structures that puts blinders up for white people. Like horses, these blinders function to keep them feeling safe and feeling comfortable, because if they were to take them off, they would have to reckon with the reality of racialized society in America. This is why Kristi is able to describe her experience of living in Washington as so idyllic, despite the fact that it's likely that her community is almost entirely made up of white people, and it remains that way for the same reason that it became that way. And this is the key element I'm going to link back to my own reflexive process. As an Australian, I realized that Bonilla-Silva's description of white habitus basically describes Australia. Although things are changing and many parts of Australia, particularly cities, are becoming more diverse, people do self-segregate, and they particularly do it in schools, which means that a lot of white people internalize this as the norm, but they would never admit it. Most people don't think of themselves as racist, but as Bonilla-Silva explains, whether actors express resentment or hostility towards minorities is largely irrelevant for the maintenance of white privilege. This was the sentiment in a lot of comments on my other video, and I want to thank everyone who brought this up, because those comments made me realize immediately that I was missing something. The way that I talked about Kristi was based on an idea that because she didn't harbor any hostility towards other people, then she wasn't acting to uphold that system. So I needed someone to crack that idea open. And for me, that person was Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. So I want to revisit the way that I described Kristi's community because I need to fix it. So here is what I said. I think the fact that Kristi has managed to hold on to some liberal beliefs and still be close to members of her family, including her sister, I actually think that reflects really well on her. There's a lot of conversation on the left about how we've lost third spaces, about how difficult it is to be in community in this hyper-capitalist and globalized world. We've forgotten that community doesn't just mean a group of people who agree with you. Community isn't about making sure that everyone believes the same thing and that no one ever has arguments. Community is about relating to other people and sharing time, space, and resources with them. With our loss of third spaces, we've kind of forgotten what it feels like to meet people who live around you, not just people who share your ideological beliefs. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but Kristi understands that. She has a right to feel angry that people are trying to exclude her from her own beliefs when she herself is friends with so many people who she doesn't agree with. Okay, so that's a little bit embarrassing because that analysis is not actually of Kristi and her community. That's based on my understanding of community. With all of that context missing, I kind of made up the place I thought she was living in. That's what I realize now. And I just want to give a shout out to this particular comment because I think they nailed critique of this section of my video. So this person said, Kristi seeks out comfort in rationalization and community. She accepts that which comforts her. She finds comfort in her local familial community, which in rural Washington means a right-wing community. She found comfort in her diverse online community initially, but now that community challenges her instead of comforting her, and she has alternately reacted with anger and silence. Her own local community will accept and reaffirm her because she ticks the right boxes. Straight, white, privileged mother who distrusts doctors and government. If she won't prioritize speaking against the bigotry she participates in her local community, or the harm perpetrated by people in her online community, and her online community rejects her on this basis, I don't think she is an ally. My stomach dropped when I read this comment because I knew immediately that they were right and I had made a mistake. I also want to revisit one of the things that Kristi said, which I based some of my flawed argument on.
And it's really frustrating because I feel like there's no I feel like the people that I meet in my real life can really have these conversations and really just agree to disagree. I have friends that I completely disagree with politically. I have friends that are, oh my God, so opposite of the spectrum. And you just realize that everybody has their own reasons for believing what they believe.
My initial reading of this was based on my philosophy that activism takes place in everyday conversations and interactions. I believe that our relationships can have such a positive impact in raising people's class consciousness and their allyship in various forms, and I chose to hear that philosophy in Kristi's words, the idea that being friends with people who disagree with you is an opportunity to make a difference. But here's what I missed. Agree to disagree, friends that I disagree with, and opposite of the spectrum are all euphemisms which make it sound like there's diversity in her community, but it's probably not diversity. It's probably just the difference between Kristi, who genuinely doesn't want to be racist, and people she knows who are pretty comfortable being racist. And that's the function of white habitus. All white networks that make whiteness the norm to a point where diversity refers more to lifestyle or ideology than culture, experience, privilege, or opportunity. So then I started realizing how much of the language I used in my own video was a reflection of colorblind racism. For example, both Kristi and I used the phrase small town as a descriptor in our videos. Sometimes I would say she was around small town people with a small town mindset. What I actually meant when I said small town people is a community of regressive rural nationalists. But the euphemism is doing a lot of heavy lifting because it minimizes the material impact of white supremacy by turning it into something gentle, almost twee. Small town as a euphemism was allowing me to speak about something without speaking about it. It allowed me to imagine a community for Kristi built on this minimization of racism. In my video, I said, despite the fact that she's surrounded by family and friends in a small town in Washington who have delusional right-wing beliefs, time and time again, Kristi shows us that she actually has held on to her more liberal core values. At first, when I revisited this, I thought, damn, that's naive in an annoying way. But do you know what's even worse? I read the words again when I put this script together and I went, oh no, this sounds like one of the examples from Racism Without Racists. Here it is.
For example, Bob acknowledged that his father was racist in response to a question on whether his family talked about race while he was growing up. My mum is very open to things, but like my dad, he still uses terms like, I didn't get that job because of a black man, them, and those people, and stuff like that, which I don't like at all. Which I just don't even talk about and stuff like that with him. We get along, but only there's some things we don't agree with, and that's something you can't change. That is, I've tried for 12 years. Bob's story perfectly fits the Trinity formula. First, he confesses that his father uses terms like them and those people. He then provides an exculpatory example of how he challenged his father's racist leanings. And throughout the narration, Bob inserts elements, my mother is very open to things, or comments, stuff like that which I don't like at all, to indicate he is not like his father, probably because of his mother, who is very open to things.
So that's just incredibly embarrassing. In one sentence, I acknowledged the fact that Kristi was surrounded by dangerous people, and I also minimized her responsibility to hold them accountable. Instead, I said she's okay because she does have quote-unquote more liberal core values. But thankfully, this reflection unlocked another level of understanding for me. I reread some comments and then I was like, okay, I really understand what you mean now. And the marker of true reflexivity for me is not in research and gaining information, although those things are important, but in my ability to look back on those comments and understand why they were angry. This realization, this comparison, as unflattering and uncomfortable as it was, allowed me to revisit a lot of the comments on my video and actually understand why people were so angry, disappointed, and I would say even betrayed by the way that I framed Kristi's community and her passivity within it when I told her story. So with that realization, I feel able to give a genuine apology. I am so sorry that I let you down, especially the people who've enjoyed my analysis in the past. I feel like such an asshole, and I'm also genuinely really grateful to have gained this understanding because the truth is I didn't know what I didn't know and I needed to hear it. Alrighty, let's get back to our story. Hello, gentle reader. We are going to skip ahead a little bit in our story. So imagine our idyllic rural Washington location, right? Beautiful tall green pine trees, big and small wildlife frolicking everywhere. Well, Kristi bought a 20-acre property in this place, and pretty soon after that, in 2020, she miraculously had a child. Now, Kristi's sister already had a school-age kid. She also had a very personal relationship with God. Well, with God, and also she answered dutifully to some Christian preachers on YouTube. So Kristi's sister felt called to start a godly homeschool, a place where children could be safe from the influence of secular people and homosexuals. This wasn't a problem for Kristi because she wanted to homeschool her kid as well, and she was very comfortable with her community being full of quote-unquote people with different beliefs to her. So Kristi hosted the homeschool cooperative for a couple of months on her property. And it just so happened that in 2024, Kristi, her husband, and her son marched alongside her sister's homeschool group in a 4th of July parade. This is what I call HomeschoolGate. Any plausible deniability that Kristi had about her association with these white supremacist Christian nationalists crumbled with this 4th of July parade. People called on Kristi for comment, and she gave none. She felt she had nothing to apologize for. And very quickly, people started calling very loudly for her to respond. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, brigaded comment sections were all demanding that Kristi take responsibility for her part in this community. But what would that even mean, taking responsibility or accountability for something like this? A year after HomeschoolGate, Kristi did release a video called Addressing the Rumors, wherein she was not contrite. In fact, she was at times quite aggressive and angry. And although she denounced any association with the hate groups who featured on signs in the march, she failed to take responsibility for her participation in community with her sister and the Christian nationalists who were working to raise a new generation of little white Christian nationalists. I found this video fascinating because it flirts with ideas of reflexivity and allyship, whilst at the same time refusing to take responsibility.
I am not alt-right! But you said I was. You aligned me with it. I didn't align myself with it. You aligned me with it. You aligned me with it when you accused me of being it.
In my initial commentary on this, I was quite understanding of Kristi's anger, and I was very willing to take her at her word when she rejected a lot of the egregious elements of her Christian nationalist community. And I will return to amend this analysis at the end of this section. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what taking accountability really means. I think taking accountability and moving forward has a few parts. The first is listening and taking the time to learn. I had to take a few days before I could start my research when I read the comments on my RawBeautyKristi video because I felt hurt and upset. And I say that because this process is not emotionless. It's uncomfortable to get stuff wrong. I could feel my knee-jerk reaction to get defensive, and that's why I stepped back, because I had to wait for my ego and reactiveness to subside before I could actually engage with what I had done wrong. Online, I often see the demand for an immediate response from people that would stop this process in its tracks. But time is actually a really important part of accountability. It's not just the act of learning new information. Observing and regulating our emotions takes time too. There are 4 major emotions that I see in this kind of discourse online: rage, fear, shame, and guilt. In activist spaces, rage and fear are 2 halves of a whole. Fear is the natural response to living in a supremacist society, and rage is the logical result of that fear. Rage feels defensive, it feels righteous, and it can give us the strength to fight back. Shame and guilt, however, are much more uncomfortable emotions. Shame is the feeling we get when we reflect on our behavior and realize that our behavior does not reflect our values. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Guilt, however, is not a helpful emotion in activist spaces. Guilt isn't helpful because it keeps you stuck inside of yourself. It's very difficult to turn guilt into action because it carries a moral weight that shame doesn't. Where shame allows you to look at what you've done and evaluate what you want to do in the future, guilt tells you that you're bad. Guilt and shame are both expressions of cognitive dissonance. The way we are and the way we want to be are not meeting. Unchallenged, these emotions can instinctively turn to colorblind racism. So we need 3 things to make these emotions productive. 1, we need time. 2, we need to be able to admit when we're wrong. Another term for this is intellectual humility. And 3, we need to be able to change our minds. Another term for this is cognitive flexibility, because you don't actually have to be smart to learn new things or counter your existing biases. You need to be flexible and humble. And when you make a mistake, you need to be able to engage with shame without allowing yourself to be overtaken by guilt. You gotta keep it productive. People were disappointed with Kristi after HomeschoolGate because she took time, but she didn't exercise intellectual humility nor cognitive flexibility. Basically, she refused to feel ashamed or guilty, and she doubled down. But this wasn't Kristi's first mistake, and she's shown in the past that she can be flexible and humble. I'm going to quickly compare some actions that Kristi took in 2015 and 2016 and the reflexive process that she exhibited then with her doubling down a decade later, because I'm really interested in why she wasn't able to take responsibility when she's shown in the past that she can. So in 2015, Kristi posted a makeup look to Instagram, which was stylized geisha makeup. Kristi received feedback that the way she copied just the aesthetic of geishas and then quite literally appropriated it with a big winged eyeliner was cultural appropriation. And it's not a meaningful way to show an appreciation for Japanese culture or aesthetics. Kristi's immediate response to this was antagonistic. She posted another photo of her in a sombrero with a long caption that included the following: "Oh hey, what's this? A sombrero? Cultural appropriation." I got about 10 comments today about how much my geisha photo was cultural appropriation and how racist and inconsiderate I was to do such a thing. So here's what I have to say to that. Oh, fuck you. I am intolerant. I am intolerant of ignorance and accusatory statements, thinking that I was doing anything other than taking inspiration from beauty and putting my twist on it. I cannot stand that I can't even take something beautiful and recreate it because I am white, and I will be considered racist or appropriating a culture. They need to realize that just because appropriation is a big word that they feel so cool saying doesn't mean that they get to say it to someone who is a makeup artist and recreated makeup. Obviously, this is a terrible response. Not only is it rude, explicit, and aggressive, but Kristi argues that she wasn't doing anything wrong because she's allowed to make her own choices. And the fact that she is a makeup artist means that engaging with the aesthetic of geishas through makeup was actually her way of celebrating the beauty of that culture. Basically, not everything is about race, you know. Falling back on that idea that we all make our own choices, by the way, is part of Bonilla Silva's concept of abstract liberalism. But this was also her immediate response. She posted it on the same day or the day after the geisha makeup, and you can hear that she's received the comments as criticism rather than feedback. That's important. Because she feels criticized, she immediately rejected the call out to avoid feeling guilty. But then, just under a year later, she led us into her reflexive process and addressed not only the original post, but her reaction to it.
Last year, I posted a couple of photos and people were saying that it was cultural appropriation, and I did not handle it well because nobody likes to be criticized, and I didn't want to believe that that could be what that was. No way, I didn't mean to, and I didn't mean to, but I could have handled it a different way. And did I learn from it? For sure. Did I learn that I reacted really poorly and the things that I said were really ignorant? For sure. But I think that that's part of growing. There are a lot of mistakes that we've all made in our past that we wish we, could turn back time, but maybe those mistakes that we made wouldn't have made us learn anything. So do I feel guilty about what I did and the response that I gave to people and my ignorance and some of the comments that I made? Yeah. I feel really fucking bad about it. The only thing I can do is move forward now, make sure that I don't make those comments now, and make sure that I keep an open mind and not such a closed mind in the way that if somebody criticizes me for something that I do, I might want to just take a step back and put some thought into what they're saying. I retract the things I once said, and I would like to apologize to anyone I may have offended, because I was thinking about how ignorant some of my comments were and how I didn't give anybody else the time of day to explain themselves, even if it were in a way that was respectful to me, And I think that it's interesting, like each year that I grow older, I start to reflect on years previous where I go, man, I was a fucking idiot. I look back on my previous self and go, damn girl, what were you doing? I think that a lot of my negative, bitchy ass attitude in some of my previous videos and some of the previous person that I was because I was in pain and I was like, fuck all y'all. And now that I'm happy and I feel good and things are so different.
I'm really interested in Kristi's description of the way that guilt pushed her to lash out and double down, because this is what reflexivity looks like in action. She takes responsibility for the original post and then reflects on her defensiveness and how unhelpful that was. She even admits that she rejected all feedback even when it was respectful. And I think it's also important that she acknowledges the way that chronic pain might have been exacerbating this reactiveness. The way she points at her own denial and defensiveness is important for true reflection and understanding. As Benia Silva concludes, in racial matters as in therapy, the admission of denial is the preamble for the beginning of recovery. So why hasn't she acknowledged the fault in her response from 2025? My original analysis was this. Now, was Kristi a little bit of an unreliable narrator in this response video? Yeah, she was. I mentioned the times that she used a straw man argument, misdirection. I mentioned her tone when she was sarcastic, when she exaggerated. And yet, even through all of that very human commentary, Kristi was very clear and honest about herself and her beliefs. And this final line should tell us everything we need to know about her values and her personhood. Kristi is not a hateful person. I have watched so many hours of her videos, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The same person who made those racist comments in 2015 has explicitly gone on to prove her growth and disavow the person that she used to be. She used to be a bit of an edgelord. Okay, we've all been teenagers. Okay. It's a bit hard to rewatch that now. I want to focus on the way that I said Kristi is not a hateful person, because that really built a lot of my argument. But that in itself is evidence of colorblind racism, because I already know that people aren't intentionally racist, right? Like, I don't live under a rock. I've called people out in my real life over this, but colorblind racism works so subconsciously that it latches onto any subconscious element of our relational experience of the world. So in this case, my affection for Kristi allowed these frames of colorblind racism to take over so that I could continue to see her in an affectionate way. People in my comments pointed out that my affection for Kristi was causing a really strong bias, or even that my affection for her was causing me to feel some solidarity with her. And when I first read those comments, I was like, yeah, I am affectionate towards Kristi, but I still critiqued her. But then after I stepped away, after I read this book, and then I came back to my original video, I understood what they were saying. And honestly, it's uncomfortable to have this realization because it's almost disturbing to realize that my own mind is so shaped by the conditioning of my social world, and I can be so unaware of it. But that's the thing, is you don't know what you don't know. So when people point it out to you, you have the choice to either swallow your ego, be humble, and learn, or you have the choice to be defensive and avoid the discomfort. I think the post from 2015 had pretty low stakes for Kristi. It blew over quickly and it was fairly localized to Instagram and Reddit. But in 2025, she risked rocking the boat of the community that she lives in by speaking out against them, which could be why she didn't engage reflexively in 2025. She was risking a lot more. What I realized now is that it doesn't matter how she identifies, that she's not a hateful person, because she's more loyal to her little Christian nationalist community than she is to doing the right thing. And that isn't true across the board. I want to be clear. There are many things that Kristi has spoken out about, but in this instance and in a few others, I think it's pretty clear. And I'm really sorry that I missed that. People called me out for being ignorant and biased, and as you can see from the clips I just played, that was true. But let's keep in mind that Kristi is capable of change and accountability. And speaking of change and accountability, there's another question that was guiding my reflexive process here, which is, how the fuck did I miss all of this? So let's talk about homesteading and America's hidden history. Right, now, where were we in our story? Oh yes, it's 2019 and Kristi has just started talking about homesteading. The landscape and the settings of our story are starting to shift. Within a year, she has a baby. It's a miracle. Slowly, we move away from white walls and beauty studio backgrounds to idyllic scenes of tall pine trees and moss, pebble paths, A-frame cabins and chickens on the ground. It's not a complete 180. These videos don't all smell like baked bread. I mean, there's one video of baking bread, but in the background you can see a countertop littered with the assorted clutter of real life. Open plastic containers and packets of food, scrunched up plastic bags and stale bread rolls, normal stuff. And Zach works the homestead now. He left his blue-collar job to work on Kristi's videos, and he takes the lead with everything. Digging, planting, researching. On the surface, it's idyllic, but there are shadows in the corner of every story.
The settler, if known by his actions and how he justifies them, sees himself as holding dominion over the earth and its flora and fauna, as the anthropocentric normal, and as more developed, more human, more deserving than other groups or species. The settler is making a new home, and that home is rooted in a homesteading worldview where the wild land and wild people were made for his benefit. He can only make his identity as a settler by making the land produce, and produce excessively, because civilization is defined as production in excess of the natural world, i.e., in excess of the sustainable production already present in the indigenous world.
When I originally told Kristi's story, I mentioned how not conservative and completely secular this change felt. And that's true. In isolation, these videos are really feel-good little slices of life. You can tell Kristi and Zach really love each other, and everything they say about wanting to live sustainably and connecting to the land that they live on sounds really wholesome. It's just that that's not the whole story. When I looked into the history of homesteading in America, and specifically Washington for this video, I kept running into this phrase, America's hidden history. That framing is going to be really relevant in a moment, but hidden or not, the history is this. Beginning with treaties in the 1840s and 50s, the American government passed a variety of laws that specifically gave land to non-Indigenous people for the purpose of homesteading. This is part of a process called settler-colonialism. And I specifically said non-Indigenous people because although most of the recipients of those homesteading laws were white, colonialism is foremost a movement to decimate indigeneity. And so some people of color could actually participate in this process as well. Just an interesting part of intersectionality. Washington's history of homesteading is particularly dismal, with a law called the Donation Land Law passed in 1850 that granted every male citizen over the age of 18 who had cultivated land for the past 4 years 320 acres. Basically, if people claimed the land, they got to own it. They even eschewed the patriarchal omission of women's rights to add extra land on for the wives of settlers. But land wasn't the only frontier for the settlers. Washington also abused Indigenous children by prohibiting Indigenous languages, religion, and cultural practices in boarding schools, where they sent children who had been forcefully removed from their communities. For those playing along at home, yes, this is eerily similar to Australia's history of the stolen generations, and justice has not been served. The fight continues and sovereignty was never ceded. But perhaps most relevant to Kristi's story is the Homestead Act of 1862, which facilitated the distribution of land amongst settlers. In its simplest form, the government granted 160 acres to any person who agreed to farm the land. These land ownership laws also extended to Indigenous populations, but only in an effort to fracture and hobble their communities. In 1887, the Dawes Act granted Indigenous men land by splitting existing reservation land into 160-acre allotments. But whereas large swaths of arable land were being granted to mostly white settlers, much of the land that was allotted through the Dawes Act was unsuitable for farming. And by 1934, not even 50 years later, reservation lands in America had diminished by 65%. I find it hard to believe that Kristi wouldn't know of this history, particularly because of all the research she would have had to do to undertake this lifestyle without growing up in it. But Kristi is able to completely compartmentalize her choice to homestead, to see homesteading as something individual, nostalgic. Even the word homesteader itself in the American context refers to the Homestead Act of 1862. But the various definitions that I looked up and the way that I saw this word used in internet forums told me that the general understanding of the Homestead Act of 1862 is divorced from its true purpose and impact, which was dispossessing land from Indigenous Americans. Instead, I saw the words homestead, homesteader, and even the Homestead Act itself referring to the neutral or even wholesome idea of property owned by the head of the household, and indelibly linked to happy family farm life. Here's an example of a definition. In US use, a lot of land adequate for the maintenance of a family, 1690s, defined by the Homestead Act of 1862 as 160 acres. Also in law, real property owned by the head of a family and occupied by the family as a house. It's quite a sanitized definition of what actually happened. And this is exactly how hidden history happens. It's a continual practice of speaking euphemistically and strategically reporting history that protects the emotions and identity of the ruling class. And it's so effective that I literally didn't even realize how much I missed when I reported on Kristi's move towards homesteading as being wholesome. The hidden history is hidden by the word homesteader itself, because the social meaning of homesteading is wholesome self-sufficiency and salt-of-the-earth family life. This seems to be what Kristi was responding and aspiring to. Tuck and Yang describe in an incredible paper called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor that urban homesteading is the practice of resettling urban land in the fashion of self-styled pioneers in a mythical frontier. But that's probably not how Kristi sees it. Homesteading is comforting to her. It's a slow life where she gets to spend time with her husband and in nature. I think it's important to understand the contextual influences on Kristi's life without losing sight of who she is and her personal experience. Because all of this leads me to the question of what we should expect from Kristi. I don't think Kristi is evil for homesteading. I can understand why she chose to do it. I don't think we can blame her for the history of homesteading, but I'm also not sure what we can ask from her. It's one part of a lifestyle that centers many elements of privilege and nationalism. I don't know, I think that anti-colonial activism is so important, and I would love to see Kristi engaging in some of this, particularly because of the history of homesteading. I'm just not sure how to call on her specifically to say that, or really how to frame this outside of just saying that contextually it's part of the pattern. But there's one thing I will say, and that is that homesteading is a part of another pattern, which is much easier to critique, and that is the pattern of crunchy conservatives.
Where do you think this intersection, this crossover between crunchy and conservative is rooted?
My personal feeling is that the crossover is rooted in individualism. So a lot of the times when you see wellness influencers talking about the universal application of their products and supplements, they really mean a specific audience that has the time for it and that can afford it. Because to partake in that industry, you have to have a certain level of privilege. And that is rooted in this sense of individual responsibility when it comes to health.
All right, so let's get back to our story. Hello, gentle reader. Let's pick up from the announcement of the miraculous conception of Kristi's first and only child. The year is 2020, but unfortunately all was not well on the home front. You see, amongst the backdrop of her new lifestyle, the atmosphere of Kristi's videos is not relaxed. She tells stories about anxiety and compulsive behavior, about how city life and the beauty industry were making it worse. The stone countertops inside of her house didn't change, but the things cluttering the countertops did. All of the plastic got swapped for glass. Organic vegetables and whole foods and handmade ceramics covered the kitchen alongside mountains of supplements. Vinyl wallpaper was ripped off and replaced with non-toxic paint. They stopped buying meat from the supermarket and started buying only from local farmers. It wasn't just Kristi who changed. When Zach witnessed the birth of their son, he saw God, and he started to seek out information, not only about God, but about politics and current events as well. On the surface, the homestead was a beautiful garden, yet the soil it was growing out of was fear. But hey, it's nice to be outside, and it's very comforting to think that the natural world and the olden days hold all the answers. A little crunchy granola is a great way to start the day. So Kristi refuses to identify with any political label, but in my original research I discovered that Kristi and Zach seem to fall into a very specific conservative subculture, and the name of that subculture is crunchy conservatives, or crunchy cons for short. Crunchy cons are basically the pick-me of conservatives. They're not like the other conservatives, okay? They don't dress the same, they don't sound the same, and they're pissed off about Republicans and the far right. I find them absolutely fascinating because so much of our discussion of conservatism right now is concerned with tacky nationalistic losers, and honestly, it's just nice to hear some different voices. The term crunchy con was created by a conservative writer called Rod Dreher in 2002, and if you've heard that name before, then you know Rod Dreher is an embarrassment to society, and I will get there, okay? But first of all, we need to talk about the essay Crunchy Cons, which ended up turning into a book. Basically, crunchy cons are crunchy because they're convinced that living a slower, more local, natural, and environmentally friendly lifestyle is the ethical choice. They're conservatives because they believe that, along with these things, a usually Christian model of traditionalism is also necessary for a good life. A core of the crunchy con identity is that they are true moderates, meaning they pride themselves on being able to connect with both the left and the right. Now, there are some problems with this, obviously. One of them being that they downplay some of the fascistic elements of the right wing, but it's actually incredibly valuable when it comes to effective activism and government lobbying. To see this in practice, let's look at Kristi's attitude.
We've been so divided between left, right, Republican, Democrat, that we can't see beyond these arbitrary labels that have been put on us by what? By who and for what? And this is the division that will cause us all to continue to fight for the rest of eternity.
Crunchy cons are actually pretty open to working towards shared goals, and this has proven to be useful. So, this is where it gets interesting. What are they? What do they have in common with the left? And can we use this to further the leftist fight against fascism? The core principles of crunchy cons are as follows: localism, or community-oriented politics, environmentalism, small government or elements of libertarianism, anti-consumerism and lobbying for the regulation of big corporations and capitalism, the importance of art and beauty, drawing a connection between spiritual fulfillment and creativity, and then finally, they do tend to be religious, so there is a connection usually between the Bible, various sects of Christianity, and family being at the center of the universe, and therefore at the center of their politics. And yes, a lot of the conservative Christian ideas about sex, relationships, and gender roles absolutely follow on with this. The interesting thing is that in action, their values of small government plus the idea of localism can actually play out as a support for some socialist policies and the enactment of grassroots activism. I find this so interesting, but you have to be comfortable with the ambiguity of crunchy cons being wrong overall to see value in finding common ground. That is the key. You've got to be a bit comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you have to focus on progress as the goal instead of perfection. But let's look at how this plays out in Kristi.
All I wanted to do was sit and research about Gaza. All I wanted to do was sit and research about, ICE raids and all this kind of stuff. And then I was like, dude, what? I'm like, some people can handle it, and I don't think I'm one of them. I am not somebody that can sit and see horror all day long and have it not affect me. I was really, really deeply paying attention to everything going on. I was over paying attention. And then it started to make me feel sick to my stomach. So I had to back off of reading the news for the time being. It is a privileged position to be able to stop reading it because they don't have the ability to stop living it, but I have the ability to take a step back from seeing it because it's affecting me. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, well, it's affecting them and you should have to see it because the people are begging for you to see it. But you've heard this saying, anxiety isn't activism, and that is true. And that is where I was living. What I've tried to do then is just what she said, help my local community. I found this motherhood resource center where you can go on and buy diapers, wipes, toys, snacks, teethers, all kinds of things for local moms who need assistance. And that was something actionable that I could do that was actually going to help people. And I know it to be true because I went outside of the building where the women pick things up and I saw their Amazon wish list on the door. I could purchase right there. It was shipped directly to that local business, and I saw the women coming in and picking up the items. There is the impact that felt like, okay, I can do something to help.
So this is exactly how CrunchyCon thinking works. Firstly, Kristi identifies that these big world problems are unjust, and then she moves on to feeling hopeless in the face of fixing them. So she turns instead to local action. She engages with her local community, and she gets to experience fulfilling her desire to make a difference by witnessing that difference in action. Chef's kiss. This is actually a really positive practice because that fulfillment keeps you motivated to keep doing activism. Okay, love that. Kristi has also talked a lot about environmentalism. She's also very critical of big corporations. In my original video, I included clips of Kristi talking about different kinds of socialist policies that she really wants to see, everything from better care for veterans to better pensions and workers' rights. And in all of this, we can see that Kristi does actually care about a lot of the causes that we do on the left. She is particularly vocal about ICE. She has a real problem with anti-immigration and the rhetoric that surrounds it, and I think that's really important. Now, in my original video, I talked over a lot of the ways that Kristi and Zach seem to fall into conspiratorial thinking as well. But for the purpose of this video, I want to focus on the fact that a lot of people are walking, talking contradictions. CrunchyCons especially. I would read about these people supporting causes that I support, and that would give me a feeling of hope, like, oh my God, maybe we can get through to these people. And then in the next paragraph, they will say something that is just so messed up, it gave me whiplash. One of these first shocks came when I realized that this whole local activism thing has two sides. One of them is what Kristi's doing in reaching out to other mothers in her community. And then the other side is the reason she chose mothers in the first place. And that's because the family unit is activism, according to CrunchyCons. Let me give you an example.
Taking care of your babies and raising kind human beings that are going to further the next generation in a positive way is activism. It is something beneficial that will help the next generation of people. That is not baseless work. That is not work that doesn't mean anything. It means actually more than anything because it is the next group of people we are raising to either care or not care. We all know World War III is on the brink. And none of us want it, but we have to suffer the consequences of it if it does happen, which I God, hope, pray it does not. All of that makes us feel like, well, what's the frickin' point? I don't know. The point is that let's raise the next generation of good kids. Let's take care of one another.
What do you mean? Making white families is certainly a type of activism. I don't really know if it's a good one. I can see where she's coming from, but also trying to understand these people is a roller coaster ride that always seems to end in Gilead, which I actually find hilarious. Get this.
Greer, a lifelong small-town Republican, says he would worry about conservatives running his town's government. Out of fear, they would let developers gut the historic town centre and call it another triumph of the free market. I don't think most conservatives have much of an answer for people who feel a sense of loss when progress destroys beauty and authenticity. To all this, conservatives can only mumble about the necessity of economic progress. They don't seem to care that something of real value has been lost.
Okay. And then Rod says,
while crunchy cons would stop well short of imputing moral inferiority to those who don't share their own tastes in architecture, trees, or foodstuff, they would also say that it's a serious mistake to think of these issues as mere matters of taste. A child who grows up in a neighborhood built for human beings, not cars, may think of man's relation to his world differently from one raised amid the throwaway utilitarianism of strip mall architecture. One's sensitivity to and desire for beauty and its edifying qualities of order, harmony, sweetness, and light has consequences for the character of individuals and ultimately for civilization. It's perilous to forget that.
Sweetness and light? Rod, what in The Handmaid's Tale is going on with you? Okay, look, Kristi hits almost every one of Rod Dreher's talking points. She's scared of the internet. She believes family is the meaning of life. She thinks animal rights are important. Rod Dreher thinks this because of God. She's a lifelong environmentalist. She hates big businesses and unregulated capitalism and consumerism. She also sees the world in terms of good and evil, and she's pretty into this right-wing idea of personal responsibility, even when it comes to all of those things. But Kristi and Rod Dreher do differ in a few key areas. Where Dreher is xenophobic and anti-immigration, Kristi rejects that. In fact, Kristi is truly scathing about the Trump administration, about MAGA, and is pretty keen on a few socialist policies, as I said. But unfortunately, there is a whopping big similarity between Kristi and Dreher that cannot be ignored. And that similarity, you guessed it, is proud complicity in white supremacy. When I first started researching Dreher, I began with his 2002 essay and kind of worked from that point up to the present. And in doing so, I read a lot of things he said that are actually low-key pretty reasonable because, as I said, he's committed to being a moderate and he often stakes his identity on his disapproval of popular Republicans and the alt-right. So it was pretty clear from the get-go that he was super Islamophobic and also patriarchal, but then he would make an effort to not be anti-Semitic. You know the type, okay? I was trying to put together a picture in my mind of how all of this was fitting together. And it's basically like a big circle that goes right over the Overton window, and it does include both the left and the right. I was finding it fascinating, okay? But then I came across this essay that he wrote in 2022 after a journalist reported that his father was in the KKK. Now, this is a very long, very self-indulgent essay, okay? He does mention Catholic exorcists with complete seriousness, which is just so bold that it's almost funny, but it's actually not funny at all because this whole essay is in service of him saying, "What? Oh my God, my dad was a KKK member? I kind of suspected it, but I didn't know for sure, that sucks, man, but he was still a good guy." Let me tell you, when I read this essay, my stomach sank down to the floor. I had been putting myself through the pain of all of his contradictions and trying to see the best in his ideology because I wanted to believe that it could be helpful. And then when I read this horrible, too long, racist apologist essay, I got the sinking feeling that this is what it all comes back to. And this is why my original commentary on Kristi left such a bad taste in people's mouths. Because to not acknowledge the connection between crunchy cons who see themselves as moderates and their very clear complicity in the worst elements of right-wing ideology, it's not even just naive, it's infuriating. I had to do some self-reflection. I made that video 4 hours long because I was having fun and because I like long videos. But now I look at it and all the mistakes I made, and I think about the people who spent all of that time watching that video and giving me the benefit of the doubt, only to reach the end and be like, that was such a fucking disappointment. I wish he didn't say that. So that really sucks. Rod Dreher really sucks. A lot about crunchy conservatives really sucks. But I want to finish this section of the essay with the fact that crunchy cons, for all of their contradictions, actually do want to work with us on the left. I'm not making that up. Many of the articles I read and the blog posts included lines or even paragraphs about how they want to work with left-wing people on the issues that we have in common. I know I made mistakes in my original telling of this story, and I didn't enumerate all of the ways in which crunchy con thinking is... I don't have a better way to say it other than it's so Gilead. but I think it's worth considering that perhaps progress is better than stasis, because the truth is, I would rather fight alongside crunchy cons than have less people in the battle against fascism. I know it's uncomfortable, but I think it's important to be okay with being uncomfortable sometimes in order to make change. I have to wonder why the left is not looking to make more allies in this time. I don't think we have to welcome regressive supremacist ideas into our movement to work with these people. We don't have to condone racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all of the other associated gender roles and regressive thinking that comes with this ideology. We can set boundaries and uphold them, and find ways to fight for a shared cause. We don't have to welcome conservatives into our movement, but we can welcome those who are willing to learn and who show up respectfully to fight alongside us. We can work with them like colleagues. Crunchy cons are not the alt-right. There are a lot of things that they too want to see expunged from American politics. And I have been talking a lot about America in this video just to keep it topical and concise, but for those who are wondering, Australia is not dissimilar to America. I've worked with crunchy cons over here. We have a burgeoning alt-right movement, and there's a lot of political violence happening here, not for the better. So please don't feel that I'm only applying these concepts to my understanding of America. Absolutely not. This is also about Australia. But I want to stay on topic just for this video. It's hard to think of holding someone like Rod Dreher accountable because he's so invested in the theory of his ideology. And I'm going to come back to the question of Kristi's accountability in just a moment. But most crunchy cons are more attached to the label crunchy than they are conservative, which means that despite the prevalence of the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, there's this whole group of people who refuse to go down the pipeline. They're just sitting at crunchy. I think it's really important that we analyze trends like the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, but I want to call out a tendency that I see to reserve empathy only for people pre-crunchy pipeline, as though after they've gone down the pipeline there's no way out for them. But there is a way out. There's a way out for everyone. And that way out is a lot closer for crunchy cons because they haven't gone down the pipeline. The trouble is that there's no perfect victim of misinformation. A lot of these people are insufferable, and many of the other things that they believe are really difficult to reckon with. I know it would take a lot of emotional maturity to do that, but there's so much possibility if we can. There's the possibility of them changing their minds, and there's the possibility of the positive difference we could make in legislation, in culture even. Anyway, let me wrap this part of the video up. Okay, this is the last bit of our story from the Book of Kristi, so let's get into it. So we return once again to 2024 and HomeschoolGate. When Kristi finally made her response, 1 year later, she said that she was protecting people with her silence. You see, dear listener, it's not a simple story, because Kristi's community members were doxxed and harassed, and their sense of safety was compromised. And Kristi said her reasoning for not speaking earlier was to protect these people from more harassment. Interesting. As it stands now, Kristi is still making videos. She has a small but growing following, many of whom seem to be a little conservative themselves, and many others who don't seem to care. The sad truth is that Kristi hasn't changed that much over her 15-year career. She's still trying desperately to lose weight. She still believes a lot of things that aren't true. She still lives in her small town. In this first part of my video, I've explored how Washington's history of white supremacy has influenced the myopic Christian nationalist population of the state, and the way that Kristi's actions in starting a homestead reflected not only this history of anti-black racism, but also the continual erasure of Indigenous peoples in America. I've also situated Kristi's political opinions in the framework of crunchy conservatism, even though she doesn't identify with this ideology, because if I learned anything from those first two sections, is that we do have to read between the lines sometimes. One thing I haven't focused on in this video is the fact that Kristi's life has been characterized by fear, shame, and pain. These are the perfect emotions for right-wing propaganda. I focused on this in my original video, and now I want to reframe it. Kristi is not just shaped by the people around her, she is part of shaping the people around her, including children. Kristi's actions are the reason people see her as a symbol of bystander fascism, the kind of person who wants to do the right thing, but not if it's going to risk too much. In Kristi's very white and conservative community, in order for her to make a real positive difference, she would need to make herself uncomfortable. In fact, she would need to make her community members uncomfortable. Bonilla Silva calls this being a race traitor, because you risk some of your privileges in trying to tear down white supremacy as a white person. It would appear that in many meaningful ways, Kristi is not willing to do that, and I just can't help wishing that she would. I can't help but look at the times she has been reflexive and the way that she cares so much about justice and fairness and give her the chance to change her mind. I just can't help but look at the way she talks about Trump, about ICE, about MAGA, about the environment, about homeless people and poor people, and not see those opinions as a possibility for growth in a leftist direction. I understand that she needs to right what she got wrong, but I have to remain hopeful that it's possible. Because Kristi is more than a symbol, she's a person. Yes, she's a public figure, but our parasocial relationships with people like Kristi are processed in our minds and our bodies like regular social relationships. That means the way we feel about Kristi affects the way that we feel about other people. That's how these things work. I think this is one of the biggest problems people had with my commentary because many people do not want to see change from Kristi. They are adamant that it's not possible. She is who she is, she's always been this way, and she will never change. They want to punish her. A lot of people also told me that because I had made a mistake, I could never be trusted again. It's the same logic, and I think it's a problem, because there's no such thing as a perfect leftist. Integrity isn't about how good your understanding of leftist theory is. It's about commitment to growth and the way you respond to making mistakes. I have to be honest, I've made mistakes before. That's why I have an established reflexive process, and that process takes time. I practice being able to admit when I'm wrong, being able to change my mind. I practice empathy. I practice media literacy, and being able to tolerate the discomfort of hearing, reading, or interacting with people and ideas that challenge my own. This is what I expect of myself, and this is what I want for Kristi. Because she has shown so many elements of this reflexive process before. And it breaks my heart to see that she's so much further away from us than before HomeschoolGate. This was the conversation I wanted to start because after all the learning I've done here, the question still remains, what should we do with people like Kristi? What do we do with people who have dangerous beliefs? There are a lot of questions wrapped up in that one. Whose responsibility is it to deal with these people? How can we possibly bring them over to our side if they've believed this stuff? Why should we even want to talk to people who have dangerous beliefs? Well, I'm going to answer those questions because it's time to talk about abolitionist activism.
The tools of swift and predatory justice feel good to use, familiar, groove in the hand easily from repeated use and training, briefly satisfying. But these tools are often blunt and senseless. Unless we have an analysis of abolition and dismantling systems of oppression, we will not realize what's in our hands. We will never put the predator's tools down and figure out what our tools are and can be. My third unthinkable thought. Why does it feel like we are committed to punishment and enjoying it? Why do our movements more and more often feel like we are moving with sharp teeth against ourselves? And what is at stake because of that pattern, that feeling? Why does it feel like someone pointing at someone else saying, that person is harmful, and with no questions or process or time or breath, we are collectively punishing them, tearing them down, and anyone protecting them to shreds? Sometimes we even do this with language of transformative justice, claiming that we are going to give them room to grow. They need to disappear completely to be accountable. We are publicly shaming them so that they will learn to be better. Underneath this logic, I hear, we are good and we are getting rid of the bad people in our community or movement. We are affirming our rightness and power. Knee-jerk call-outs say, those who cause harm or mess up or disagree with us cannot change and cannot belong. They must be eradicated. The bad things in the world cannot change. We must disappear the bad until there is only good left. But one layer under that, what I hear is, we cannot change. We do not believe we can create compelling pathways from being harm doers to being healed, to growing. We do not believe we can hold the complexity of a gray situation. We do not believe in our own complexity. We do not believe we can navigate conflict and struggle in principled ways. We can only handle binary thinking: good, bad, innocent, guilty, angel, abuser, black, white.
Abolitionism is the movement to end slavery and all of its modern iterations. Abolitionists seek to end the prison industrial complex, and many of us seek to end policing as well. Abolitionism is framed by the idea that punishment isn't helpful. It isn't fair and it isn't effective in making our societies safer and happier. The alternative is called transformative justice. You may have heard that phrase before, but you might be unfamiliar with what that can actually look like or what it really means. So I'm going to explain that through this part of the video by looking at how transformative justice can work within our own movement. There are two things I want to address in this section. One is the Kristi question. What do we do with people who have dangerous beliefs? And two, what's going on with public shaming and punishment on the left? And these two ideas come together in exactly the same way. There's a very clear playbook for insulting, rejecting, and brigading people online, and it's being used against people like Kristi, who have a lot of deconstructing and deprogramming to do, but also people like me, who are genuinely leftists in the pursuit of growth, accountability, and commentary. There were many productive comments on my video, and if you are one of the people who left some of those comments, I really hope you saw your influence in the first part of this video. But there were more unproductive comments. And I mean unproductive because over a period of 72 hours when I published that video, I found it difficult to eat or to sleep. The demands were that I delete my channel, that I delete the video, that I issue personal apologies to people I'd mentioned in my critique. Quite a few of the comments, including one of the commentators I mentioned, demanded that I compromise my anonymity in penance. The messaging was very clear. Because I had made mistakes in that video, I was unworthy. I should be ashamed. I was a bad leftist and a bad person, and I should be punished. And even though I am an abolitionist and I believe in transformative justice, which means that when mistakes are made, there is always a way to make reparations and move forward, I found myself giving in to these punitive demands. It was just so effective. I even took the video down for a couple of hours. Thankfully, I was able to step away and commit myself to my reflexive process so that I could make sense of what had happened. But we see this all the time. And honestly, it made me question my value, not just as a commentator, but as a person. But why did these unproductive comments take over? Where is this coming from? To establish what brigading actually looks like and sounds like, I want to compare a couple of productive comments to a couple of unproductive comments on that video. It's important to note that productive discourse does not have to be emotionless. For example, this commenter says, "I had a longer rant that I'll have to reevaluate because I'm so mad I could spit. This is what I'll say that's level-headed. Nothing, no matter how impartial it claims to be, is free of bias. To be human is to have bias. It feels like to me you went in with a lot of bias and it affected your research into this topic. That's the only logical reason to me why your take is so uninformed. Frankly, I think you were so tunnel-visioned you failed to consider the context of what is happening in the US right now. If you don't understand America's political climate or the talking points / language MAGA or MAHA use that clues people in on what's what, why marginalized communities are upset and angry and afraid, and why RBK sets off alarm bells, then you do not know what's going on. You lack context and background." This comment told me I needed to do better, and they also told me they were angry with me and why. This person tells me clearly that I lack context and background knowledge and the implication of this for my commentary. This is a productive comment. Let's compare it to this.
You should delete your account. If this were me, I would honestly just delete this video. Copyright strike any mirrors of it, delete the raw files and any backups I had in my possession, delete the script, factory reset my computer, destroy the computer and camera/equipment I used to produce the video, take on a new persona entirely, and forget I ever did this. Like, this video is that bad.
I'm sorry, that was actually amazing. I have to use that one.
Face of consternation.
Okay, and this one?
It's okay to say that you guys are both conservative. There are other hateful bigots that have a commentary channel.
Or this one?
I don't think this person knows what being leftist actually means.
There's so much going on here, but the main goal is simple: to punish me. These comments make it seem like my video was 4 hours of conservative apologia, but it wasn't. My video is actually very critical of Kristi, but it's also unbalanced, which you can tell from productive comments like this one. While I usually enjoy how you give people the benefit of the doubt and try to pin down the mindset that started their drama, I think this one kinda went over the line, IMO. I feel like this video's premise of "is she MAGA" is a misguided way to approach the situation, as it turns it into a semantics battle and leads you to overanalyzing her words and life in order to prove her political leaning. Even if you didn't intend it, the contrast between the empathy RBK receives and the comparative lack of empathy given to the people hurt by her actions ends up giving this video a very "I can excuse homophobia, but I draw the line at getting the facts wrong" vibe. I just want to say this sentence alone helped me so much to understand where I went wrong, so thank you to the person who left this comment. They go on to say, "IDK, loved your shorts and lipstick lesbians deep dive, but this one's going to be a miss for me, dog." This is such a thoughtful comment. This person critiques my research question and the way that led me to a really biased and inadequate analysis. Their critique is clear and actionable. They also gave me positive feedback, which is really helpful because there are a lot of clear differences between my Lipstick Lesbians video and my RawBeautyKristi video. So by comparing the two, I can also start to understand what went wrong with this one. Incredibly helpful comment. Let's look at one more of the unhelpful comments.
Your video is an appalling mess of mis- and disinformation. The idea we need to extend grace and understanding when RBK has been a fucking bigot for years. Your own leftist critique is so breathtakingly empty, filled with microaggressions and dog whistles, and really suggests you have no critical thinking to speak of. You very, very clearly do not have any understanding of American society, politics, or history. Your assessment of RBK and your responses have confirmed for me that I cannot trust any of your commentary or the idea that you actually research or think about anything you say. Don't just demonetize the video, remove it. Offer a detailed correction and apology that is not monetized, then step back and attempt to learn why people are dragging your ass. I would suggest showing your face as part of owning your shit instead of being a faux intellectual coward.
Okay. So this is a little piece of everything, and I chose it because it uses many strategies from the brigading playbook, which I can see in many other comment sections. This comment insults me, tells me that I'm an unworthy leftist, says that I'm spreading false information, and weaponizes the language of transformative justice against me. They also make the claim that I can never be trusted for anything I've ever said or will say, and they demand that I punish myself by removing any revenue as well as the video itself. They also instruct that I remove my anonymity and penance. This is such a blatantly punitive comment that I'm a little bit shocked at how we got here. Once again, I refer to Adrienne Marie Brown and her book, We Will Not Cancel Us. We have to recognize that we are on dangerous territory that is not aligned with a transformative justice vision when we mete out punishments in place of consequences, and or when we issue consequences with no inquiry. No questions, no acceptance of accountability, no process, no time for the learning and unlearning necessary for authentic change. Just instant and often unsatisfactory consequences. The kind of call-outs we are currently engaging in do not necessarily think about movements' needs as a whole. Movements need to grow and deepen. We need to transform ourselves to transform the world, to be transformed in the service of work. Movements need to become the practice ground for what we are healing towards. Co-creating. Just as I showed with my reflexive process in part 1, we need the help of specific intellectual and emotional tools to engage in effective activism. We need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need to be able to both give and take time before we react. But there's a whole media ecosystem that flourishes on our reactivity, and I think it's part of why the leftist brigading has taken over. To learn how this happened, we need to go back a little bit, to the beginning of print media. In the late 18th century, European printing presses began publishing outrageous stories about sex, crime, and humiliation called scandal sheets. Accuracy wasn't the goal with these stories. Often journalists would take insignificant personal or private stories and portray them as a major influence on society, exaggerating things until they were barely recognizable. All the way back in the 1780s, people were reading headlines like this: "Characters of the present most celebrated courtesans exposed, with a variety of secret anecdotes never before published." Sounds familiar, right? These are the earliest forms of tabloid journalism and sensationalist media. Tabloids work for two distinct reasons. One, they're shocking and they produce strong emotional reactions. And two, They are a form of gossip.
A public accusation, or at least the exposure of the culprit of a scandalous act, is at the heart of most tabloid stories. In other words, tabloids offer readers and viewers a massive experience of engaging in the titillation and gratifications of gossip as a way to express hostility and to pressure rule breakers to abide by communal norms. Another social function of gossip in tabloids, according to experts, is that by becoming informed of the scandalous behavior of others, the self-esteem of media consumers is raised. Reading of the dysfunctions of others can make people perceive themselves as better, more respectable, moral, and law-abiding than the people they are reading about. This might be particularly true for groups of people who feel themselves unfairly diminished or disadvantaged.
Basically, when we engage with tabloid media, we feel superior. So any political messaging from tabloid media becomes incredibly potent. Because tabloids trade in strong emotions, fear-mongering is one of their most effective and damaging tools. The role of exaggeration in tabloid reporting is directly associated with a feedback loop between sensational media and inflammatory political rhetoric that deepens social division. But not all tabloid stories are political, of course. Most of them are humiliating stories about sex or relationships, or shocking stories about wrongdoing. Crimes or alleged crimes play a really big role in tabloid reporting, but beyond that, accusations of wrongdoing are usually enough to grab a reader's attention. But tabloids didn't remain in print media or even in the hands of media companies. They've been democratized since the advent of the internet. In 2004, 26-year-old Mario Armando Lavandera Jr. began his blog under the moniker Perez Hilton. Perez Hilton's blog posts would go on to define many of the pop culture conversations over the next decade and a half. His reporting was characterized by elements of sensationalism, and it was all wrapped up in derogatory nicknames and the punitive practice of sharing as much private information as possible to cause the greatest amount of humiliation. Perez was like a dog with a bone, harassing celebrities over a period of years for the same perceived faults, flaws, or character traits. It's not controversial to say that Perez Hilton dehumanized his celebrity subjects in his reporting. In fact, I would say it's common knowledge. Hello, editing townsperson here. I just wanted to say that I finished filming this video the day before Perez Hilton's very public and traumatic psychotic episode. I am incredibly saddened by his actions, and I'm also really upset by the fact that so many people encountered that with no warning. I have no ill will towards Perez. I really hope he's supported in his recovery. I also hope all the people who encountered that video are able to recover. My critique in this video is entirely concerned with his actions as a blogger and a media personality. One thing that became clear from Perez's online empire is that behavior in online spaces can be so much more intense than IRL because the balance of power is skewed. Researchers have found a specific style of text-based language use that has grown out of weaponizing gossip online.
A key finding in protecting identity and reputation studies is that people will deliberately use specific words to protect themselves while harming others if it achieves a goal of preserving one's own identity and reputation.
And the key to understanding this as a power exchange is in the solidarity of the commenters under posts that use this kind of language.
The gossiping here shows solidarity amongst people by transmitting information about a person's identity and reputation, which influences our view of behaviors. Setting up oppositional roles is done by the initiating author to present their view of the world as right, hence protecting them while persuading others to view the person being gossiped about to be at fault. This strategy is taken further when the gossip or rumor spreading involves serious accusations.
We think of Perez Hilton's aesthetic style for insulting and harassing people, his use of nicknames, the exaggeration, the way he shares private information, as gauche. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's controversial to say that Perez Hilton's style of writing dehumanizes his subjects.
I didn't even see celebrities as human beings in a lot of ways. I viewed them as characters in my soap opera.
But we don't seem to recognize this from our current commentators. Because all of this is still alive and well, it just looks a little different now. Drama and commentary channels dehumanize their subjects by using a moral framework to accuse people of being immoral people. And interestingly, it's easy for them to insult people in pretty much the same way that Perez Hilton did by simply framing their insults as a criticism of choice. I recently saw a drama commentator insulting Michaela Nogueira's skin. But they didn't just say that her skin was busted. They said her skin looked really bad, so that must be evidence of the fact that her skincare line doesn't work. Even though they started with the sentence, "Her skin looks really bad," they ended it by convincing us that they're allowed to insult her physical appearance because they're not actually insulting something she can't change. They're insulting her choice, her actions. And within that, her reputation. Broadly though, the exact same language and subject matter of 1780s scandal sheets are splashed all over YouTube drama and commentary thumbnails. Characters of the present most celebrated courtesans exposed with a variety of secret anecdotes never before published is just yesterday's Gabby Hanna exposed by former fans. Everything about these thumbnails was present 100 years ago. Images of people at their ugliest, caricatures of their likenesses, the use of words like shocking, exposed, secret, predator, and abuse were all used in scandal sheets. The sharing of information that may or may not be true, that might be exaggerated. The subject of the story is insulted, humiliated, and punished, and we see that all reflected in the comments below. And the focus on controversial stereotypes, like homophobic ideas about gay men or sexist stories about women, they're all still present in drama and commentary channels. But now people are blamed for allegedly perpetuating those stereotypes rather than just ridiculed for representing them. Can you see the difference? It's a moral judgment on the stereotype itself, but the blame is still placed upon a person who is humiliated, and the stereotype still takes center stage. As an example, let's return to Kristi. Peter Mon is a drama channel who created an effective smear campaign against Kristi based on her alleged support of fellow influencer James Charles. I'm not going to rehash this entire situation because I spoke about it in detail in my original video. What I will say is this. Peter Mon used a phone conversation with Kristi to convince everyone that she's a duplicitous, uncaring snake. Her crime was following and liking some photos of an influencer online. This story is so exaggerated that I honestly can't take it seriously because not only has Peter recently confirmed the disclosure I mentioned in my original video, which negates the basis of this moral attack on Kristi, but he also keeps saying that she needs to apologize for the fact that she took 4 whole days to unfollow James Charles after their phone call. Mind you, in this phone call, Peter attempted to manipulate Kristi by indirectly threatening her. He confirmed saying that if she wasn't going to do the right thing, then she would face consequences, as though those consequences were inevitable and not his choice to continue harassing her. After this phone call, Kristi vowed to never again communicate with any drama or commentary channels, but Peter won't take any responsibility for this. In fact, he suggested in response to my deep dive that I should have reached out to Kristi for comment. How was I going to do that, Peter? You made sure she would never speak to any of us ever again. I literally couldn't get in touch with her. I tried. I bring this up because it's a great example of the power exchange described in the research about online gossip and tabloids. Peter has used specific words like the phrase supporting a predator and sometimes also private information like a phone call to position himself as a good person whilst convincing others that Kristi is a piece of shit. And I specifically like this example because it's so flimsy, but the reason this story has taken hold is because Peter's argument is a moral argument. He's saying that Kristi is immoral because she liked some posts from James Charles, but countless people still believe Peter's version of the story because he created the narrative and he mentioned it in over 25 videos. Since 2023, every time he's mentioned James Charles, he's mentioned RawBeautyKristi, and he won't let Kristi off the hook for it, even now, even after she's proven multiple times that she doesn't support James Charles, because he's been crafting a narrative based on this moral framework for years, and he'd have to admit that that was unreasonable to let it go. The solidarity in his comments section reinforces this power imbalance, and the solidarity is real. People were coming to my video where I illuminated Peter's manipulation of the situation to tell me that I should apologize to Peter Mon for pointing out what he did using his own words. Now, Peter Mon isn't the same as Perez Hilton, but he's shockingly similar. Both of them are gay men who have used their platforms to mock mostly women. Both of them have spent years haranguing individual celebrities to create moral outrage that would justify their harassment. Both of them dehumanize their subjects by choosing only the worst possible aspects of someone's personhood or actions to represent them. Both of them have used their personal relationships with public figures to share private information or create salacious narratives aimed at ruining their reputation. And neither of them has ever taken sincere responsibility for any of this. Perez Hilton has apologized, but only because he's achieved absolution through accepting God. So I don't think that's a real apology because he thinks he got away with it. Oh, actually, you know what? There is one major difference between the two, and that's the fact that Perez Hilton was 26 years old when he started his blog. Peter Mon was 45 when he started his drama channel. Now, I want to be clear. Peter is not the only one who does this, okay? All of the drama channels and many of the commentary channels partake in this as well. And it's something that, we all navigate one video at a time. I want to be clear, I don't think there is anything unforgivable about this, because people are always capable of learning and adapting their content and understanding more about the impact that they can have. I know some people see me in the umbrella of a commentary channel, and I sort of leaned into that in my last video, but truthfully, I consider myself a video essayist, but I'm very new. This is my 6th video, and I'm still trying to figure out what I think the best way to talk about people is. I worried that my Lipstick Lesbians video was a little bit too critical. I wondered if I could have put in more about what they did well, and I think that informed some of the mistakes that I made with my RawBeautyKristi video, so I'm definitely figuring it out as I go along. This is not an indictment of every drama or commentary channel by any means, but Peter is a great case study of the modern tabloid because he's been very upfront about the fact that he doesn't care about ethics in his videos. He feels no moral responsibility whatsoever. So I really have no qualms calling him out for this because he responded to my critique and this is what he said.
First of all, drama commentary channels would not exist if people didn't fuck up to begin with, okay? If you hadn't made this video and Kristi hadn't fucked up to begin with, I would have nothing to talk about with RawBeautyKristi, all right? I have never claimed to be an ethical investigative reporter. You got me fucked up. I don't know where you ever thought that. I have never said I was anything but a shit-talking gossip tea channel. I have always said that. I've never claimed to be an investigative reporter doing massive research. That is not my responsibility. When we started as drama commentary channels, do your fucking research, okay? We were covering shit like Patrick Starr rolling his eyes and Manny and Jeffrey doing things at the same time. Kristi wanted to be part of that community as somebody with 1 million subscribers, okay? She's part of the beauty industry. I was covering beauty influencers on YouTube. She's part of that, okay? I'm sorry she made such shit moves that now this is what I'm covering, okay?
Okay. Ooh, I'm smiling under my hood here. It's actually such a blessing when someone else does your work for you. Thank you, Peter. You're right. That's exactly what I'm saying that you're doing. Please continue.
I'm a shit-talking gossip tea channel. That's what I am. I don't claim to be moral high ground. If you want to call it virtue signaling, call it virtue signaling. I do not think that I am the moral compass of the world. So to say that I am virtue signaling or I am the moral high ground of something or that I'm the gatekeeper on this, I've never claimed to be that, all right? Call that what you want. Call that narcissism, gaslighting, virtue signaling. I don't care. Put every label on me that you want. I will respond to it again. I will keep this going. I am a drama commentary channel. When this person got this video and talked about virtue signaling and all this, honey, I don't know about all that, all right? I just don't, People say, oh, you're a narcissist. I might be. I don't know. Maybe I am a narcissist. Maybe I'm the biggest narcissist in the entire world. Maybe I virtue signal all the time. I don't really know. To be honest with you, I don't even fucking know what those things mean sometimes, okay? To use them in the context of this word. This gal, she does so much word vomit, I didn't even understand what she was saying half the time in her video. Gabby Hanna years ago said, manage your expectations. And she's right.
Oh my God, not the Gabby Hanna. Okay, truly incredible, Peter. I couldn't have asked for more from you. Amazing. It's just such a good defense because how could I call on Peter to be better if he doesn't give a shit? Incredible. Anyway, so this is completely in line with tabloid journalists, by the way, because I looked this up. I was like, well, now I have Peter's response. I was wondering, do these tabloid journalists feel the same way? Well, this is what they think. Tabloid journalists defend the lack of ethics of their field by arguing that they are in the entertainment business. Therefore, ethics pertaining to fact-based information and the public good does not apply to their work. Alrighty then. Anyway, the other thing about Peter is that he threatened me.
You're looking real homophobic right now. You already look racist with your microaggressions towards black women in your video, all right? So I don't know what you're going to say in this video. If it were me, I'm just giving you some real good advice. I'm telling you right now, what you should come out and do is put a post up and say, I'm removing the video. This is not a topic where you can come back and revamp it. People are going to compare your first 2 videos. I already know people have downloaded this video, all right? They're going to compare your second video to the first video. I already know people are doing that behind the scenes. So you check it. I'm just telling you right now, all right? I'll be calling in favors like you don't even know that people owe. I'm just telling you right now, okay? And I will interview police people online, and I will tell you the information I know, and that will be the moment that I do drop the video, okay? I'm just telling you right now.
The police? What are you talking about? The police, Peter? I mean, I get the thread about sicking drama channels onto me, but the police? Right after you spent like 5 minutes talking about how you and your family members have been doxxed because you put your face and your legal name online, and then you tell me that I need to put my face and my name online, and now you're talking about the police? I'm an abolitionist. I wouldn't do that to you, but what are you talking about? Anyway, all of this works great because his commenters don't care either.
Peter Mon, I adore you. Keep speaking the truth. I understand he rambles in his content, but he has always been upfront that he is a drama gossip channel, and his viewers know that too. So you holding him to an academic standard is so strange to me. I'm really sad to see Peter being targeted again because of his integrity on the issue of James Charles and Kristi. I can't help but think he's specifically being targeted because of his age and sexuality. 54 years old, gay. At Disgruntled Townsperson, has Peter ever claimed to be an intellectual?
Okay, I'm not holding Peter to an academic standard, I'm holding him to an ethical standard. I called Peter Mon a public intellectual because I think that's part of the role drama and commentary channels serve. Not for better, but for worse. Because these people are giving morally or politically coded commentary, people look to them to form their opinions. The problem is that in following the tried and true strategy of tabloids, these channels are changing the way that we relate to the people they talk about, which affects our ability to empathize. Laura Duggan wrote that,
empathy is important because it is directly linked to pro-social behavior and with having a sense of social responsibility that enhances the lives of both the individual and the broader collective, such as volunteering and participation in local projects and community events, as well as a higher likelihood of avoiding engaging in antisocial behavior of all types, from rowdy public drunkenness and littering to causing harm to others.
Peter Mon dehumanizes his subjects by judging them only by their worst aspects, and his followers have formed a vocal brigade which he aims and fires at people inside and outside of the movement. He will simultaneously claim to be an activist and reject any responsibility for the harm that he causes. Interestingly, this flattening of all complexity is also present in the way that Peter's audience perceive him. He is not a person to his followers. He is a symbol. His identity makes him impervious to criticism and gives him a license to continue. That's why they often refer to him as a gay man in America and not just Peter. But what really worries me is how this impacts the media literacy skills of his audience. Many of the comments that reference Peter as a gay man under my video seem to be referring to his commentary on my video rather than the video itself. They don't address the content of my work, but they cover all of his talking points. This kind of response worries me because it speaks to an inability or unwillingness to evaluate information. And I think tabloid-style commentary channels are making it worse. When you get your information from someone who also tells you how to feel about it, you forego the practice of coming to your own conclusions. Instead of watching videos to learn new information, people are watching videos to be told what their opinion should be. Media literacy is a practice, and it requires a skill called the tolerance of ambiguity. That's the ability to navigate complex situations without flattening them to make yourself more comfortable. There's a disturbing trend in these leftist brigades that shows people are unwilling to or even fearful of listening to things that challenge or do not represent their ideas. I get the feeling that people are fearful of hearing something that may influence them in an unwanted way. And within that, I see a great deal of unconfidence in the ability people have to evaluate information on their own. I got so many comments on my video saying I didn't watch it.
I am so glad I didn't waste my time to watch a video of you kissing up to RBK for 4 hours straight. Haha, thanks comment section. Looks like 4 wasted hours. I'm good.
Beyond that, there were so many comments that show a shocking lack of discernment, critical thinking skills, and literacy. These comments called my video a 4-hour glaze of Kristi. They claimed that I did no research and said that I was spreading misinformation. One of these comments actually included misinformation even after they just accused me of spreading misinformation.
I never leave these as an XYZ comments, but as a trans viewer living in America, how dare you? How dare you tell trans people and actual trans allies how to perceive things going going on in this country. Try. You clearly have no fucking clue about. How fucking dare you? Kristi was aligned with an explicitly homophobic religious co-op. I don't care what Kristi herself has said. Her son had on a "Don't Mess With Our Kids" t-shirt. It's called a dog whistle, sweetheart. Maybe listen to queer and trans Americans instead of making yourself look a fucking fool. Shame on you.
Kristi's son didn't have a "Don't Mess With Our Kids" t-shirt on. One of the people in the float was carrying a handmade sign that said "Don't mess with our kids." Kristi's son's t-shirt had like a Bible verse on it. This is a real issue though. We're expecting Kristi to gain these skills after a lifetime steeped in propaganda and privilege. But why do so many leftists have really poor media literacy skills? I don't think everyone commenting on my video is stupid, by the way. As I said earlier, to be able to effectively learn new information and change your mind, you just have to practice reading, listening, and evaluating. I think we're stuck in a social media ecosystem that keeps us from changing our minds or admitting when we're wrong or practicing the patience and discomfort of listening to things we don't agree with. Mickey Atkins has an incredible video about all of this as well. I couldn't say it any better than she does here.
For our individual selves, I really want to encourage you to prioritize growing your cognitive flexibility. That's going to look like engaging in your community, but also diversifying your learning, right? Intentionally seeking out opportunities to have your perspectives challenged is very important. Caring for your physical body and your mind in ways that are stimulating for you are going to be very important. I know that it sounds sort of silly, but continuing to challenge your brain is an important way that we promote cognitive flexibility.
A lot of comments on my video were telling me off for instructing marginalized people to approach and confront their oppressors in order to teach them to be better. They're also telling me I spoke for them. And I understand where people are coming from here, so I'm going to say this very gently. I didn't say that. And I would never say that. I was talking about Kristi, a public figure, as a symbol for this larger conversation about how we can interact with people who are falling down the pipeline to conservatism. I mentioned my own experience with a fundamentalist Christian to make the point that activism can happen in our everyday conversations. I don't think it's everyone's responsibility to change every conservative's mind all the time. But we all know that these conservative movements are much broader than just white people. I mean, there are many people of color who support MAGA in America, just like there are lots of people of color in Australia who support Pauline Hanson's One Nation. It's a scourge. That means that all of us have spaces in our communities where we could be having conversations that make a difference. But the other thing about RawBeautyKristi's story and her experience of online brigading is that privilege is not a straight line. The power exchanges are wibbly wobbly and they can change in different contexts. Yes, Kristi is a white woman and she is responsible for her role in her community. But in this situation online, after everything that I've just talked about when it comes to the power imbalance of tabloids and gossip and online behavior, Kristi was being brigaded by hundreds, if not thousands of people. When I spoke about Kristi's victimhood in this situation, and the victimhood of the people around her who were doxxed and harassed, I'm not going to take that back just because she's white, and even though she has stuff to answer for, and she's yet to apologize. Because I don't believe that anyone should be treated that way, and I don't believe it's helpful. So I'm not going to take back my philosophy around activism existing in the way that we treat people and the opportunities that we give them to change their minds. That's a core pillar of abolitionism and transformative justice. And that's why I want Kristi to change her mind. I'm not forgiving her before this has happened. That's my expectation. And honestly, I question the helpfulness of our need for every single detail to be covered in every single piece of commentary. I know language is important and we should be as specific as we can be, but this need for every leftist to make a disclaimer at the beginning of everything they say is getting out of hand. I feel like we can't handle ambiguity. At the beginning of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, she has a really long foreword talking about how she changed the metaphors that she originally used in her essay because they made some people uncomfortable. This is the impact of perfectionism in leftist spaces. The simple truth is that no one can speak for everyone. Adrienne Marie Brown used metaphors in her essay that came from her experience of mental health. People responded by saying that her language choices didn't reflect the way they wanted to hear mental health being discussed. And I question if we've lost the ability to look at a text for its own merit within its own context and understand why it affects people in different ways without judging the text itself for being inadequate. I also think this perfectionism has led to a huge uptick in virtue signaling because everyone is under this microscope and their integrity as a leftist is constantly being evaluated. So the performance of saying the right thing at the right time is almost more important than the actual activism. Virtue signaling is the public performance of moral actions or opinions in order to gain social capital and to be seen as a good person. Virtue signaling creates incredibly empty commentary. It strips complexity from our activism and it makes us feel better. It also works really well as a punishment, which is what Peter did with Kristi. I think this is part of why our political affiliations function more like social identities online. There's no need to independently evaluate information, because the comments underneath a post or a video will tell you who's right and who's wrong. So people aren't forming their opinions based on information, they're forming their opinions based on what perspective is going to get them into the in-group. Because being in the out-group is kind of scary. People have assumed for a while that right-wingers are incredibly rigid in their beliefs, and that's part of why they socially ostracize and punish each other. Throughout the second half of the last century, sociologists researched right-wing community behavior, and they found that to be true. But more recently, research has been done in left-wing spaces as well. Papers by Lior Zmigrod, J.J. Van Bavel, Andrea Pereira, and several others have found that rigidity of the right, which is what that assumption used to be called, is actually less accurate than what they now call rigidity of the extreme, wherein exaggerated viewpoints and socially identifying with political ideologies turns into more rigid and extreme thinking across the whole political spectrum. One of the key pillars of this is identity. Dressed up as lived experience, we label ourselves and each other and use those categories to decide if people are worthy of speaking, a la Peter Mon, a gay man in America. But under the idea that lived experience is what creates credibility, the implication is that understanding and empathy isn't really possible. The underlying question is, how could you ever understand me if you haven't lived like me? It's a very rigid way of thinking, and it keeps us so separate. When people claim that we should only speak upon what we know, I hear, I will not tolerate your process of learning. If you make a mistake, you make me angry, and I don't want to hear it. It's perfectionism again, it's exclusionary, and it's not helpful. Lived experience is used by this commenter to discredit me and compare me triumphantly to another victim of leftist brigading, ContraPoints.
Who is you? I'm not even American, and I know more about the issues behind all of this than your sorry ass. Like, girl, what kind of educated take is that, lol? Peter, myself, and a lot of commentary/drama YouTubers have not only lived through and experienced hate on a level you clearly know nothing about and have the bad back or wrinkles to show for it, but just so you know, you're not the only person who reads books and might have a random degree. Hey, maybe some of us even have a few. A shit take is a shit take nonetheless, and you're holding one here. Pipe all the way down with this BS. Are you trying to be the new ContraPoints? It didn't go well for her either. Lukewarm wokeness and weaponization of concepts you hardly grasp at won't help you protect a morally bankrupt influencer, and you might even fall with her. Hope that harms.
Okay, first of all, you're comparing me to ContraPoints? Oh my god, thank you. And actually, I'm glad you brought ContraPoints up because honestly, no one's doing it like she did. I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that ContraPoints used to make videos that helped to de-radicalize alt-right men. In fact, do you want to know who told me about ContraPoints? The year was 2018, and one of my friend's boyfriends, who I found insufferable, told me that he'd found this new YouTube channel, and it was ContraPoints. And I didn't trust this man, okay? He couldn't even remember what kind of cake his girlfriend liked or disliked for her birthday, and he bought her the wrong one. So at first I was like, why would I take a recommendation from you? But then he explained what he had learned from these videos. And the way he was talking was gentle and introspective and thoughtful, which was new from this dude. So I went home and I started watching ContraPoints and I went, oh my god, this is incredible. So I do take inspiration from the way that Natalie framed those early videos because I don't want my videos to alienate people who haven't spent the last 15 years developing their leftist ideology. Like, that's me. I've spent the last 15 years developing my leftist ideology, and I still made the mistakes that I made with my Kristi video. No one is perfect in the fight against fascism, and I want to foster an environment where it's okay to be imperfect because you're trying to be better. Natalie practiced the tolerance of ambiguity to make her early videos. She made a material impact in the fight against fascism. Literally all it takes sometimes is a spark to light the fire. And oh my God, I saw this with my friends' boyfriends and ContraPoints. Like for real, he started arguing with his friends and trying to get them to watch the videos. But without tolerance of ambiguity from her leftist audience, Natalie has been brigaded and rejected, and comments like this are proud of it. This is what Adrienne Marie Brown is calling out. The glee, the pride in punishment. It's been taking the same form, and it's happening so much now. Like seriously, did you guys recently see that Kiki Palmer made a TikTok about this? I'm not joking. Anyway.
Instant judgment and punishment are practices of power over others. It's what those with power do to those who can't stop them, who can't demand justice. This injustice of power is practiced at an individual and collective level. What concerns me is how often it feels like this instant reaction is happening within movement. It feels like a feeding frenzy, but we in movement don't identify with predators. Our historical reality is that we are the prey, trying to defend ourselves, protect each other. There is such complexity with trying to name this dynamic within our movements. I persist in this line of inquiry because it's also true that we are practicing, training ourselves through repeated motion, a strategy of moving in frenzy towards punitive actions, even as we try to put transformative language on our behavior.
One thing that I've noticed about leftist brigading is that we seem to have our own brand of thought-terminating cliches. These are phrases that shut down any further conversation or any questioning. These are so readily used that I noticed them playing out in other places after they came to my comment section. Common thought-terminating cliches are, you used AI to write this, you only care about money / did someone pay you to make this, you're a white liberal, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Actually, X behavior or rhetoric is a right-wing tactic. You're being really right-wing right now. And you're spreading damaging ideas. You're spreading misinformation. For those just listening and not watching, I've just put a bunch of examples up on screen. And these thought-terminating cliches are almost always accompanied by demands for monetary punishment and penance. A few months ago, I saw a community post from a leftist video essayist apologizing for taking a sponsorship that had some sort of problematic association. And as an apology, they were donating the entire sponsorship payout. In the comments of that community post, people were praising this creator for quote-unquote actually taking accountability. And this made me feel so sad and so angry. This creator was policing themselves in anticipation of the pushback that they would get for being associated with something problematic. But a lot of the time, it doesn't matter what the creator does. It will never be enough. Demanding that people give up their income for making mistakes is diabolical. You can't complain that there aren't enough leftists and we don't have enough leftist creators and then make an effort to remove the material conditions of creators being able to do this work. In my RawBeautyKristi video, when I mentioned that it's much more lucrative to be a right-wing influencer than a left-wing influencer, this is part of what I was talking about. Because not only do left-wing influencers get less lucrative opportunities, but our community is policing not just the work that we make, but where our money goes as well, and where it comes from, which is kind of crazy because under capitalism, like all money is dirty money. All of this serves to protect us from having to sit with things that are complex or contradictory. That is the whole point of this self-policing. We are demanding perfection because it feels good to pick on these contradictions and chip them off. It feels comfortable to create a media ecosystem where the leftists that we listen to are perfect and anyone who steps outside of that is rejected. But the ultimate consequence is that people are disengaging their empathy because they feel morally superior. It's the same thing tabloids have been doing for over a century, and now it's taken on a life of its own and it's wearing a leftist mask. Finally, I want to talk about my choice to use inclusive language for the left. I purposely include leftists, liberals, people who don't identify as leftists but are anti-conservative, anti-MAGA. I include all of you when I say we and us. And I don't know why this is such a surprise. As a queer person, we've included people who are questioning under the umbrella of the letter Q for such a long time. Why can't we include people who are left curious as well? Why do they have to be perfect to get an invite? I reject that. You don't have to be perfect to get an invite into my comment section or to watch my videos, and I really hope that you feel included in my videos. My aim has always been to grab the attention of as many people as possible and funnel them into analysis and conclusions that center empathy and left-wing activism. Is it working? I'm not sure. Will I continue to do so? Probably. I've specifically tried not to alienate people from my work because I believe perfectionism is literally the enemy of progress. Why is it better to push someone out of the left than it is to watch them grow into a better version of themselves? I love this phrase that I learned from Mickey Atkins, calling out and in. I did a little research into the difference between calling people out and calling people in, and it turns out that people in a lot of different contexts are using the term calling in. It refers to confronting people about things they did wrong in a way that is conducive to their growth, often having private conversations instead of public ones, and approaching them in a way that allows them the space to improve and change, and the expectation that they will. That's what I want. I don't think everything needs to be a call out. Sometimes we can make a call in. So you might ask, where's the line with that? What about Kristi? She's not a leftist, and she hasn't even apologized. Why should we give her the benefit of the doubt? Well, let me bring it back to Kristi and talk a little bit more about abolitionist activism before I wrap all of this up. We can agree that Kristi has a lot to answer for. She needs to make amends, she needs to be reflexive, she needs to take responsibility. If she is to make a real earnest attempt at allyship, at being a race traitor, as Bonilla Silva would say, she's going to risk her own discomfort and her social standing. That's something that a lot of people pointed to in the feedback for my last video because I was missing that understanding and also that call for accountability in my video. And that was a mistake. But after all my research, I have to wonder, what could we have achieved if we had called Kristi out and in instead of dehumanizing her and pushing her further away? Yes, Kristi is responsible for her own words and actions, and she has so far been unwilling to risk her position in her community to make amends for her part in HomeschoolGate. I've talked about how our aggressive, combative, and judgmental way of dealing with conservatives makes us feel, but we need to consider how it makes them feel. If not for them, for us. Karen Tamarius is an American therapist who identified this punitive behavior in herself and then intentionally changed the language that she was using in her discussions with MAGA family members. She found that by choosing more accessible and less judgmental language, she saw an immediate shift in the receptiveness of these people to identifying misinformation and changing their mind. She said, "The most important thing I learned was how much of the division between us is an illusion, that it has far more to do with speaking a different language and communicating poorly than it does with an actual difference of opinion." This might sound crazy, but what she means is that most people generally do want things like justice and fairness, and usually they engage with misinformation that tells them they are being held down in some way. We know it's propaganda. We know it's not true to say that white Christian Americans are being persecuted. But the people who are vulnerable to this believe that, usually because they've been convinced that they are victims. And it's pretty embarrassing. We know it's embarrassing, but if we can put in the emotional energy of approaching a conversation without embarrassing or judging or blaming these people, they're much more likely to feel empowered and be open to understanding that they might have believed something false and then that their beliefs were actually harmful. Just as I explored through my own reflexive process in the first part of this video, it's really important that we aim to disengage guilt before it even begins, because guilt is so unhelpful and it often pushes people away before they even have a chance to actually engage in reflexivity. We shouldn't want MAGA supporters to feel guilty. We should want them to feel motivated and affronted at the way that they have been misled. And yes, I do endorse leftists expending emotional energy strategically and effectively. This is why it's imperative that we resist the punitive desire to give people what they deserve and instead believe that everyone has the autonomy to learn new information and change their mind. We have to respect and observe our feelings of fear and rage without allowing them to take over. And the best part about this is that you feel so much more empowered and much less afraid when you realize that we are not surrounded by bad people who can't change. We're surrounded by complex and contradictory people who change all the time. With the right tools, the right language, and enough practice, making this change is really actionable. Smart Politics is an initiative that was started by Karen Tamarius, and I love this description in their FAQ section.
Political attitudes and behavior are a result of environment, not character. And all people, even those whose ideas and behavior you abhor, are capable of changing their opinions when external influences shift. We can facilitate this process of change by initiating and creating space for more rational, compassionate, self-reflective, and curious dialogue that makes it easier for people we disagree with to hear what we have to say and learn.
This is how we can change our call-outs to call-ins. But on a serious note, the language and the style of critique in HomeschoolGate was not the only thing that stood between Kristi and her reflexive process. Kristi was doxxed and harassed, primarily by leftists. She felt unsafe, and so did members of her community. And I know that people feel that's her just desserts, especially because many, many people are unsafe under a MAGA government, but I don't believe that this punishment is effective in achieving what matters. The impact of doxing and harassing the people who are involved in HomeschoolGate is a net negative. They are further from changing their mind than they were before that happened. And also, this caused harm. No one wants to take responsibility for the doxing and harassment of these people. Some commenters are even calling for Kristi to prove that she was doxed, accusing her of lying and making it up. Even though quite a few people have admitted that they contacted Upper Room Academy or Kristi's family members about this whole situation. I even included a source in my original video who admitted that she contacted Upper Room Academy and deceived them in order to make commentary about it. But it doesn't matter, because Kristi received it from us anyway. And I already know people are mad that I'm using inclusive pronouns to discuss this. Whenever I said us and we in my comments or in the live chat of my video premiere, people were so quick to tell me that I didn't get to include them. They were not included. I get it. Did I dox Kristi personally? No, of course not. And did those commenters dox Kristi? Probably not. It doesn't matter. This, for me, is a part of collective responsibility. To complete this reflection on what is going on in our movement, we need to acknowledge that the media ecosystem that we are participating in is clearly connected to the harassment of Kristi and her community. Even Peter Mon, an instigator himself, knows and understands this, but he selectively applies that understanding only to his own victimization, never to anyone else. Take a listen to this.
Like, these are how vicious these people are, right? I mean, as far as contacting the police over the accident, saying they need to reopen the case, and trying to find out certain things about my private life, you know, all kinds of information that they have tried to find out, following my doctors on social media, contacting my dentist, calling our vet, you know, calling like close people associated with my friends and my family members. I mean, it's unbelievable the lengths that people have gone to. And I just want to say this. I know that there's going to be people out there that say, well, I'm not part of that. Well, you are when you're instigating, you're commenting, you're engaging in conversations that the attempt is to take me down, okay? So you are part of that, whether you want to believe it or not, okay? And I'm not trying to stop you by doing that. If that's the life that you need to live, just know what you're doing. You really are part of hurting somebody's life.
You know what's worse? People are doing this to leftists. While I was writing this video essay, I came across a TikTok where a leftist creator basically made a very small version of this essay. They spent the first half of the TikTok apologizing for the mistakes they'd made and taking accountability for that. And in the second half, they responded to the fact that their comments had been brigaded. But on top of that, they were doxxed. And they were doxxed by people in their real life within their actual leftist activist communities because of a TikTok.
I want to talk about the response. And I mean the response to my video by the greater internet. Because, oh my God. So I took a week break from all social media because it was making me throw up from anxiety. But from the things that people have shown me, holy shit. For those of you unaware, I've been trying to connect with members of my local community, and so it was bewildering to see members of that community doxing me. Which was then followed by people who I've talked to a maybe combined 10 minutes in their lives out in public, putting out giant exposés on who I am as a person.
Does intimidating people and violating their privacy and safety sound like justice to you? Who does that serve? And how is it reflecting the values of our movement? We have fostered an environment where people are bonding over the harassment of other people who are in their community. And I understand that Kristi is a little bit outside of that, but only peripherally. Because the reason people were so mad at her was because they felt betrayed by her. They wanted to trust her. They wanted to like her. Ultimately, I think we need to take responsibility for each other. No one wants to, fine, but I think we need to. I think we need to actually consider what we want from this movement that we're in. Because we all want to tear fascism down. But if we're going to do that, we need to create a space that is not fascistic. Otherwise, there's no point. That means we have to stop the public shaming. We have to stop the punishment. And we have to be better at calling each other out and in for our bad behavior. We have to accept that people are going to make mistakes and give them a way to move forward. And we have to shift the conversation from giving people what they deserve to doing what is helpful and productive. It's like y'all never read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and it's showing. I think we need to be open to imperfect leftists. And I think we need to be open to right-wingers. Because the path to helping someone understand why their ideology is violent is so much softer than online brigading would have you believe. So, that is my updated critique on RawBeautyKristi, and that is also the philosophy that underpins my channel. If you take one thing from this, let it be that there is no perfect leftist, no perfect commentator, there is no innocent party. We all make mistakes and we can all learn from those mistakes. I've made mistakes in all of my videos, and I've learned and gotten better every time. I accept all of you into the movement to fight fascism, and the only conditions are these. You want to be here, and you want to be better. That's it. Thank you so much to all of my wonderful, mysterious benefactors. Patrons of the arts are not so easy to come by when you're just a lowly peasant, but I am continually blessed by my incredible court of benefactors. Madeline, Luxie, or maybe Lucy, sorry if I got that wrong, Alison Danley, Isabel, Ray, Farrah Harper, and Sarah. Thank you all so much. We do have fun on Patreon. I try to update as much as possible. I also write, I think, really fun poetry. It rhymes. And I may be writing a short story this month as well. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching. And please, please be kind on the internet.